Hi, and welcome to this week's installment of The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, your host. As always, the primary purpose of this show is to provide you with useful information, thoughts, and financial remedies to assist and guide you through a time in your life when financial missteps could have a much larger negative impact than when you were younger. Each week I share some of the insights and expertise that I use in my financial practice and bring them to you as either food for thought or actionable items for financial or investment concerns you might be having. Many of the times, people don't even realize or recognize what these concerns should be. They feel as though they're doing everything right. You might be watching the nightly news. You might be reading financial publications, sitting down with your broker or financial advisor on a regular basis to make the most of your situation. But history has still shown that time and time again, the information distributed to you by various outlets turns out to be wrong, or if not totally wrong, just ignores some very important facts. So why is it so often wrong or incomplete? That's what today's show will help you discover. And I'm sure that it will get you thinking and maybe even rustle some feathers of people that I occasionally run into in my own business. And that's fine with me. Our guest today is an expert on the subject of media bias. He's Vice President of Media and Culture at a much heralded organization, watching the media and what you're being told. They listen and watch word for truth. Then they make the findings available as a public service. So as much as the news and the media are in many ways supposed to be your source of information, or even the public's watchdog, as it turns out, the watchdog actually needs a watchdog. As you may know, America has a watchdog with the Media Research Center. So you're in for some great insight and perhaps even some disturbing examples today of abuses in the media, abuses that we're exposed to every single day. A little later in the show, I'll be interviewing Dan Gainor, who for 10 years was head of the division of the MRC. The MRC exists solely to be the watchdog for you. I'll see if I can get Dan to pull the cover off some of the machine that shapes public thoughts, the media themselves. I've known Dan for a while, but I've never had the opportunity to have this discussion with him. I look forward to his informed insights and depth of understanding of what either is intentional misdirection or complete dishonesty, and what may just be the nature of information distribution. Marty Johnson's also back this week with a special report on why the media, like so many other businesses, may be flawed or missing their potential to do good. And most of the media is a for-profit business, whether it's a newspaper with a 200-year history, a major television network, or a recent blog that you read. The main goal is to make money. Actually, in many cases, informing you is a bit lower on the list. How much lower? Well, by the end of the show, we'll have a better idea of where we rank in the media's eyes. Last week we had an economist, Peter Morici, on, and he discussed some of what drives market expectations. And it's expectations that often drive investment prices and returns.
The reality is, though, is that Mr. Obama would be limited to spending only as much taxes come in, so it would force a balanced budget almost immediately. That is a manageable proposition. So to say the Republicans are irresponsible is absurd. But unfortunately, who's ever president of the United States gets to set the terms of the debate by virtue of the bully pulpit, and he's got America convinced that somehow or other we're going to renege and welch on our debts. Nothing could be further than the truth. The only person that can determine whether we renege or welch on our debts if we don't raise the debt ceiling is the President of the United States.
Well, with a constant barrage of news 24/7, and even phone apps today that are updating and informing us on a constant basis, it would be almost impossible for the information distributed, whether correct or not, to not work its way into the market psyche and even yours. This, of course, has a huge effect on us all. As for myself, I'm a student of the markets, and I sometimes sit dumbfounded as I listen to a reporter discuss why the market's moving up or why the market's moving down. The reasons they give at times, I think, are so oversimplified as to be comical. I often wonder if they're intentionally oversimplifying, or if they purposely omit discussing the most likely causes of market moves. for fear that you at home simply may not understand. Let me give you a simple example. In August of this year, the stock market moved significantly lower in what the media called a flash crash. This event included one of the top 10 worst days in the history of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Since the talking heads on television always promised to deliver and provide the answers immediately, they had to give viewers a reason for the drop on the spot. My experience is that they seem to have a list of go-to explanations for most market moves. This time, they pulled out the old high-frequency trading and lack of transparency as being the cause. They basically blamed electronic trading. They quickly were airing conversations to viewers about market reforms to help improve these causes and conditions. Whether the news outlets were right or not didn't matter. All the folks at home who digested this as a cause were fed information that is now part of their beliefs to one degree or another. The reasons given much later on, when analysts had time to look at all the mechanisms that played into that historical day, ended up being much different. And that is still being studied. I thought of a similar event back in May of 2010, which had a 1,000-point flash crash. You might remember that. Back then, the media also pointed to the same culprits, high-frequency traders. Enough time has passed and research conducted since that event to have come up with an entirely different set of reasons. In fact, the conclusion the SEC came up with, along with the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, specifically stated that high-frequency trading did not cause the flash crash. The staffs of these two agencies discovered that futures contracts in Chicago, specifically something called the E-mini futures, had a liquidity crisis, and it caused a price drop of 5% within 4.5 minutes. Did the news outlets issue a correction or even apology? Not that I heard. That was yesterday's news. And what I described briefly earlier is not something most viewers would quickly grasp or tie together. Perhaps they're afraid to give too much information because they don't think their audience can handle it. Today's show will talk about this and even more sinister motives. That's one of the reasons I'm here, to dig deeper than a soundbite or a quickly fabricated reason to explain just the market move of the day. In fact, after a very few very bad days after the flash crash this August, the market began climbing back. Much of the climb, according to analysis done by my staff at Sound Income Strategies, was due to investors covering what's called short positions in the stock market. These trades have the same effect as any other purchase, so of course the market began to rise. Now, this again wasn't explained as one of the possible reasons on anything written or aired that I have seen since then. I guess they didn't think you'd understand. I remember hearing instead that China suddenly was no longer concerned and that the Fed was expected to raise rates, and that was the reason for the original drop. But the market climb is because the Fed would probably be on hold for a while now. And of course, the old standby excuse, unemployment concerns.
Read David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, Return on Principle, 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Discover practical solutions to the financial challenges facing today's generation of retirees and near retirees. David Scranton's approach to financial planning is a holistic system designed for maximum protection, strategic growth, and reliable income regardless of market conditions. Available now.
If you have any money at all, you can rest assured there are people who will be trying to relieve you of some of it. Now, I'm not suggesting necessarily in an illegal way. We all know there are people who will steal. What I'm talking about today, though, is legal businesses that bombard us all with dubious images and definitions of what's best, what's normal, and what we need to do to live happier, more successful lives. One example I like to show is legalized fantasy sports betting. If you haven't seen these commercials for these fantasy sports companies, which fits almost every definition I know of gambling, well then you're lucky. On their commercials, which typically air during football or baseball games, they have one person after another talking about how For just a few dollars entry fee, they were able to win thousands of dollars playing. They're all extremely happy, they're full of energy, and the commercials urge you to get into the action along with them. The underlying message is that you can't lose. Now, maybe these commercials and the business practices of this industry shouldn't bother me as much as they do, but when I see the advertisements, it reminds me of the ads and business tactics of discount brokerage firms and online trading sites. The message their commercials constantly send is that it's so easy to invest, a baby can do it. You've all seen those, I'm sure. Another ad looks to get people to buy more by convincing them that if they're like the winner in the commercial, when they have an idea, they also need to act upon it right away. Yet another sends the message that all you really need is the right charting tools and you'll instantly take control over your finances. Much like the ad for one-week fantasy leagues, which may not specifically be asking the viewer to gamble, I feel these discount broker ads are suggesting the same thing. They craft the message that it's easy, it's fun, everyone's doing it, and everyone's making money doing it. It's almost like they've even taken scripts directly from the cigarette ads of yesteryear. You know, if you smoke, well, you'll be cool. Or in this case, if you day trade, you'll be cool. Let me mention another reason for us to all be upset. When a product portrayed as glamorous, yet it has the potential to do as much harm as smoking or online trading, the company and perhaps even the network is acting irresponsibly. But it's you as a citizen who gets stuck with the bill in one way or another. Think about it. Both the tobacco companies and those touting these ease of do-it-yourself investing have cost Americans billions. That's who's footing the bill for irresponsible misrepresentations of what you should expect. Why would large TV networks not instead have more wholesome advertisements? For the same reason, congressmen may be more likely to act on behalf of lobbyists than their constituents. There are lobbyists pursuing them and pushing them, incentivizing them to act on their behalf instead of yours. It's similar with TV and magazines. Paid advertisers are far more important than non-paying viewers. I'll even go as far as to say it affects the very content of the supposed news shows. I hope to dig deeper into this with Dan Gainor later in the show. My registered investment advisory firm, Sound Income Strategies, is already held to a fiduciary standard. I believe that brokerage firms, which are a related business, should also be held to the same standard. This is why I get so fired up when I see commercials that are encouraging people to gamble with their future. They should all come with a warning, much like packs of cigarettes today, that say, don't try this at home. In fact, right now, President Obama is making a huge push to have all advisors, including brokers, become fiduciaries when investing clients' retirement accounts. I'm a managing member of a registered investment advisory firm, as I said a moment ago, so I'm already held to that fiduciary standard. In fact, I'd lose my license and effectively be out of business if I didn't put my clients first. Holding brokers and other advisors, and hopefully one day commentators also, to a fiduciary standard, I believe is a good thing. Because it's not so easy that a baby can do it. So it may be a rare moment when I agree with one of President Obama's initiatives, but I hope in this case that his push on this topic is successful. You heard that right. I agree with you, Mr. President. All advisors need to be held to the high fiduciary standards of putting their clients' interests above their own. Many types of financial advisors don't have to under current regulations, so make sure you're working with an advisor that does. Dan Gainor currently runs the Business and Cultural Institute at the MRC, but has also been the T. Boone Pickens Fellow as well as the Director of the Free Market Project in the past for the MRC. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. It's a pleasure.
First of all, can you tell us what the Media Research Center's primary mission is?
Well, we're a conservative media watchdog, and it's our job to both identify and then neutralize left-wing bias in the media. We've been around for more than 28 years, And we are probably the largest archive you're going to find this side of the Library of Congress for video. We've got, I think the last number is close to 600,000 hours of video.
Wow.
And that means that we're monitoring ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and not just for news, but also for entertainment. Because one of the things we found over the years is that the bias in the media is in all aspects of media. And you'll see that, you'll see it attacks on conservative issues, you'll see it attacks on businessmen, you'll see it, TV shows where they're always targeting businessmen as villains, and the free market system in our country as somehow evil. But one of the things we've learned over time is that essentially the American public has lost faith in the media, and there's good reason for that.
Okay. All right, fair enough. That's a great explanation for our viewers. Why do we need a media watchdog? I mean, why can't the media?
I spent decades in news. I spent decades in news before I came into this job. And I can tell you that on every major issue of the day, journalists have opinions that they let creep into their news copy. That's who they're friends with, who they socialize with, how they vote. That all creeps in, and it ends up undercutting people's opinion. If you look at the opinions going year by year, using the Pew Center for people in the press, the opinions of the major media have been pretty much on a steady decline for years. And the reason for that is people now have a better sense of what's going on in their media. They turn on TV, they can then watch it in Twitter, watch it on Facebook, and then get real-time reaction. And when they do that, they realize just how disastrous what they're being fed really is. And the net result is, who watches the watchers?
Right. Good question. That's absolutely correct. And obviously, you're one of the people that help us with that, and we're grateful for that. Let's point the conversation now to the interested parties that are associated with, many of the shows that are considered financial shows or even financial news shows, where I'm not sure the American public realizes that, unlike the internet, everything on TV is paid for by one group or another. Can we talk about that for a moment?
Oh yeah, sure. And I mean, when you get into niche markets, financial shows, sports shows, that's where it really, I guess you would say, some of the worst media cronyism is. Because, I mean, it's in your best interest to not alienate the very people who are paying your salary. And then you get it, so that crops up when you've got an ABC evening news show, and you're touching on a lot of different topics. You're going to run less maybe into advertisers. But if you are talking about something happening in the business media, then you're really running into a much more narrow market where financial advisors, mutual funds, everybody involved, they've all got a piece of the pie, and you're expecting whoever you're watching to be a neutral observer. They're not.
Yeah. So who else beside financial advisors, mutual fund families, are the advertisers in these types of shows that might influence the decision of a reporter or someone else?
Well, I mean, I think even before you get into that, you got to think also about corporate ownership. It's a very finite number of organizations that own media. So you're looking at, just use it, NBC for example. NBC is MSNBC, is CNBC, with corporate owners, ultimately Comcast. Are you going to really, and then so that means they're extremely reliant on cable. A couple of those shows, a couple of those networks wouldn't survive at all without cable. And then, of course, they're owned by cable. So you're going to expect them to be, have their advisors, their analysts come on and talk about cable and say, oh yeah, we think the future of cable is bad. No, of course not, because they're too closely tied to that market. So then you go into start looking at advertisers, and it's the whole universe of financial media, financial advisors, financial mutual funds, stock market, from soup to nuts. And so and you can even listen in. You can when you're watching a show, sometimes you'll hear, oh, we just recommended this stock, and 2 minutes later you're hearing an advertisement for a company that's related to that company.
Yeah, so you wonder why, and then all of a sudden you look back later and you think, oh, I get it. It makes sense. Yeah, it's so true, and I want to talk more.
It doesn't necessarily mean that they're compromised. Yeah. It just means that you've got to really take a jaundiced eye at it all.
And of course, with any publicly traded company, if the advertiser is publicly traded, their number one fiduciary responsibility is to their shareholders. And it's very easy for a reporter writing an article or doing a news report to get influenced by what they say. And right after the break, we're to talk more about that. We're here now with Dan Gainor, talking about some of the issues that we have to deal with in the news reporting world, in this field, and how some of the things that you hear and read about financial advice and so on could be skewed more toward the profit motives of a particular person, and maybe just a little bit less toward what's truly in your best interest. We'll be right back with Dan Gainor. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation, again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation. We're here today with Dan Gainor, and we're having a frank conversation about how reporting, specifically financial reporting, be it through published media or through television, is influenced by the likes of advertisers and other interested parties. Dan, you're talking about the advertisers per se, so it sounds like you're saying if an advertiser for a particular show, for example, is a mutual fund family, then it's likely that you're going to hear a lot of positive things about mutual funds, for example. Is that correct?
Well, or if nothing else, you won't hear the negative. I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, everybody has to pay the bills, and so if a particular show is funded entirely by mutual funds, you're not going to hear that show is saying, "Oh, well, mutual funds are a bad bet," because advertisers will flee. If you watch the evening news shows, you don't see a lot of stories, generally speaking, attacking the whole drug industry. Evening news shows are funded. There are a lot of advertisers that are drug manufacturers. It's just not one of the things that they crusade against. So when you're looking at, when you get to the basics, really it helps to understand how you kind of make the secret sauce that is journalism. And while the economy started doing a downturn in the last several years, with 2007, journalism never really stopped. And as a result, you've seen massive decline in number of working journalists in major cities. We've lost a lot of major dailies. There's a lot fewer people reporting there, and then there's a lot of pickup of what other people do. So I mean, all it takes is one bad story sometimes, and the next thing you know, that bad story is spread like a virus across the internet. Yeah. And so because journalists are not spending a lot of research time double checking it, you really have to be well informed. And to give you an example how bad this can really be, you're not going to get the most advanced knowledge from journalists. Several years ago, I'm a member of Society of Professional Journalists, which is not mandatory, but it's a good organization. And I took economist Brian Westbury, a great guy, took him to an annual conference, and we had a meeting talking about how to teach economics to journalists. And there's about 26, 27 journalists in the room, and Brian got it that by speaking to that small a number, he was speaking to hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And so the first question he asked, he says, how many of you have had advanced training in business or economics? One person raised a hand. And he just went off. I mean, he's a very nice guy, but he was just stunned by how embarrassingly bad this was. And he said, how are you supposed to cover business and economics if only one of you had any training in it?
And Dan, isn't it
That's
true?
what they do. So it's easy to pull the wool over the eyes of.
Dan, isn't it also true
easy
that
to pull the wool over their eyes?
Isn't it true also that a lot of times writers, to gain experience, might write about sports for a while and then write about something else and then maybe fall into finance? Is that a big part of the reason why perhaps that they're not experts in that particular area as most readers would think?
Well, I mean, most journalists are generalists. I mean, you're not, maybe when you get to the Wall Street Journal level, you're not talking about that. But, there are people, journalism is a trade, not a profession like medicine where everybody necessarily went through years of study. A lot of journalists didn't get a journalism degree. And even then, a journalism degree is how to do journalism, not how to do economics, not a study of business. And frankly, when you kind of scratch the surface of most journalists, they're not business friendly. I've always joked, when you go to work at a news organization, the news organization isn't even friendly with its own business department. The people, they don't like the advertising and circulation people, the people who help pay their bills. The only time they talk to them is at the Christmas party. So to expect them to to turn around and be friendly to your business, it's just not going to happen.
Right. In the 2 minutes or so we have left, Dan, can you share with our viewers some egregious examples, or at least one egregious example of in the financial industry that you can recall?
One of the worst examples, and I mean, this is foundational to the economic collapse of 2007, 2008, is the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac scandal.
Sure.
For years, Wall Street Journal led the charge saying that this was an organization, an operation that was destined for chaos, and the American public would be on the hook for billions and billions of dollars. Mm-hmm. New York Times picked up on it, much to their credit. Washington Post picked up, much to their credit. And there was almost complete and utter silence on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, to the point where Charlie Gasparino, who I remember him coming out at the time, and he was railing on the networks and saying that the reason why they're not talking about this is bias. But here's the reason why. Because the journalists were convinced that Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac helped ordinary, particularly poor and underprivileged people get mortgages. So they would go to talk to their buddies on the Hill who invariably were pro Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they're telling them, oh, there's nothing wrong. So it ends up being this enormous disaster, costing taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars. And only when everything really hit the fan did the networks even at all attempt to cover it.
Yeah. And anyone who owned Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac stock back then actually knows what's happened to that. There's been a huge loss of wealth for shareholders. So you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, and I mean where's the responsibility for that? If you're an investor and you rely on the regular media to tell you what's going on, then you're just a dazzling fool.
I love it, a dazzling fool. All right, well, so for our viewers, obviously, you don't want Dan Gainor to refer to you as a dazzling fool. So pay attention to different sources. And as I always say, always ask the question, why? Why is it something's being touted for us? Marty Johnson's going to be here in just a minute and actually talking about that as part of her report. So Dan, I want to take this moment to thank you very much for being part of our show today, as usual.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Okay. And we'll be right back in just a minute with Marty. Stay tuned.
The closing numbers on the markets today, at one point the market fell as if down a well, over 700 points.
Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4-5%.
We're down over 16%. Dow at the same time has fallen about 18%.
The stock market is now down 21%.
Because we're now down 43%.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
Finally, there is an alternative. Read David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, Return on Principle: 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Discover practical solutions to the financial challenges facing today's generation of retirees and near retirees. Learn the truth about Wall Street, the financial media, and the secrets they try to hide from everyday investors. This isn't just another book about investing. Working Americans who have lived through 2 major stock market crashes and the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression in the past 16 years don't need another book about investing. David Scranton's approach to financial planning is a holistic system designed for maximum protection, strategic growth, and reliable income regardless of market conditions. Stop planning for retirement with your fingers crossed. Plan with confidence, knowledge, and peace of mind. Read Return on Principle: 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Available now.
When it comes to your money, you always have to ask the question why, as in, why is this particular advisor or this particular reporter recommending the approach that they are to me? This is especially true in the financial services industry, as we've seen today. Some of the reasons to be wary of what you see in here are that so many of the so-called experts on TV, in the magazines, and even professional advisors invited to your kitchen table to help have a vested interest in promoting whatever sells their products or services. This lesson extends to all areas of your life. So when you're hiring a professional, be it a landscaper or a contractor, or even a lawyer or doctor, remember to ask yourself why. Why are they recommending what they are, and is it really what's best for me? One of the examples I like to use when speaking to my clients is as follows. Let's say that I told you I were having some back pain, and I went to 4 different medical professionals to get help. Now, I ask, how many different solutions do you think I might get from 4 different medical professionals? Well, what if I told you that they came back with 4 completely different recommended treatments? At first, you might be alarmed. But then if I told you that one was an orthopedic surgeon, one was a chiropractor, another was a physical therapist, and perhaps the 4th was an acupuncturist, now it would actually make sense. This is because in the medical field, and as well as every other field, everyone has an expertise, and they're likely to want to help your issue with whatever they can provide and subsequently get paid for. You know, there's a saying, when you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So in the medical example, knowing the why the different experts are recommending what they are is very, very important. The same is true for the financial industry. And I'll include investment analysts appearing on TV in this group also. Ask yourself why they're recommending what they are indeed recommending. It may be because that's what they're getting paid for recommending. Just like you'll probably never see a time when a stockbroker says stocks are bad investments, you'll probably never hear a real estate broker say real estate is a bad investment. Now, when it comes to your health, most people of the income generation understand the differences between these 4 various medical professionals and what they do. Unfortunately, differences are not as well understood in the field of financial services. People tend to paint the financial industry and financial advisors with one broad brush. They look at all advisors as being very much the same, even though they know that doctors, for example, are very much different. In reality, there are many different types of financial advisors, just like there are different types of doctors, lawyers, construction contractors, and even beauticians. You want to make sure you go to the one who is the best fit for the why for which you're seeing them. This is important and will soon be designating an entire show to determine the type of advisor that's right for you. And as I said earlier, preferably one that's required to act as a fiduciary, so you could be even more comfortable that they're acting on your behalf. You know, in my personal practice, Sound Income Strategies, I talk to prospective clients all the time who are currently working with stock market-based advisors. Often these advisors work for one of the big brokerage firms, but at times they're independent. Many times these prospective clients are surprised to find that they have a majority of their money in the stock market. I'm generally not surprised. If you think about it, this is why stockbrokers are called stockbrokers. They typically search to find solutions with the limited answers found within the stock market. Like I said earlier, if you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Today we got to sit down with Dan Gainor and learn about all the good work being done at the Media Research Center. I, for one, am grateful the MRC exists and his role as media watchdog. I'm personally happy to have shared this resource and to help the income generation understand that this information is there for you. I want to also thank Marty Johnson for her reporting. Marty's report was very important for all of us to understand the role that advertisers play in shaping what makes it onto business news. Now, I cannot wait for next Sunday when we have conservative icon and best-selling author Steve Forbes on to discuss how 3 things are going to potentially save our country: repealing Obamacare, redesigning the tax code, and reforming the Federal Reserve. He says it'll bring our nation back out of its malaise and on its track to growth and prosperity.
Right. And in terms of a stable dollar, you know, you want, the dollar works best, money works best when it has a fixed value. You know, money is not wealth. Money measures wealth, the way scales measure weight, or a ruler measures length. And money.
Forbes has written a new book on this subject called Reviving America. I've just finished reading it personally, and I look forward to sharing this great thinker with you. If you haven't signed up yet for a complimentary special report titled The Income Generation, which allows readers to discover many answers to their investment questions, sign up now at theincomegeneration.com. You'll discover a wealth of useful ideas for financial security that you may have never known existed. Well, that's it for today. I'm David Scranton. You've been watching The Income Generation, and we will see all of you next week.